I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning when I realized that Brenda Patterson had just made the biggest mistake of her HOA presidency career. My insulation installer, a guy named Marcus from Superior Home Solutions, had arrived right on time with his truck and equipment ready to go. We had scheduled this appointment 3 weeks in advance, gotten all the necessary permits from the city, and I had even submitted the required architectural review form to the HOA 30 days prior, as mandated by our community guidelines. Everything was legal, proper, and by the book. But there she was, standing in the middle of the cul-de-sac with her arms crossed, blocking Marcus from accessing the side of my house. "You cannot proceed with this work," Brenda announced, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that only HOA board members seem to master. She was wearing a white cardigan despite the Arizona heat already building in our Scottsdale neighborhood, and her short blonde hair was styled in that classic soccer mom cut that screamed middle management energy. "Excuse me," I said, walking down from my porch where I had been waiting. "We have all the approvals. I submitted everything a month ago. The board has decided that your application lacks sufficient detail about the exterior modifications," Brenda said, pulling out a printed email from her pocket like she had been preparing for this confrontation. "You cannot have contractors accessing your property until we receive clarification." Marcus looked at me with confusion. He had been doing this work for 15 years and had dealt with plenty of HOAs, but even he seemed baffled by this intervention. "Sir, I have the work order here. We are just installing blown-in insulation through the attic. There are no exterior modifications except for accessing the attic vents, which is standard procedure." "I am aware of what the work entails," Brenda said, not even looking at Marcus. "But the rules are the rules. Peter, you know how this works. The board needs additional documentation before any work vehicles can be parked in front of your residence or access your property." My name is Peter Donovan, and I had lived in the Saguaro Heights subdivision for 5 years. In that time, I had watched Brenda Patterson rise from a concerned neighbor who attended every meeting to the HOA president, who seemed to believe her position was equivalent to being a federal judge. She had made life miserable for at least a dozen homeowners with her constant complaints, arbitrary enforcement of rules, and general power-tripping behavior. But this was different. This was active interference with legally permitted work on my property. "Brenda, I have the approval right here on my phone," I said, pulling up the email thread. "The Architectural Review Committee approved this 3 weeks ago. Tom Henderson himself signed off on it." "Tom is no longer on the committee," Brenda said quickly. "The board voted last week to reorganize the committee structure. All previous approvals from the old committee need to be resubmitted for verification." This was news to me. You cannot just invalidate approvals retroactively. That is not how this works. "I can and I will," Brenda said. "Now, I suggest your contractor leaves the premises before I call a towing company for unauthorized commercial vehicle parking in a residential zone." Marcus looked at his watch. "Listen, I have 3 other jobs today. If we cannot do this now, I will have to reschedule, and my next opening is not for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I had already been dealing with my energy bills skyrocketing because my attic insulation had deteriorated over the years. The summer was getting hotter and waiting another month and a half was not an option. I had taken the morning off work specifically for this installation. "Give me a minute," I told Marcus, then turned to Brenda. "Can we talk privately?" "There is nothing private to discuss," she said. "The rules apply to everyone." "Brenda, please, just 5 minutes." She sighed dramatically but followed me up to my porch, staying on the steps while I stood in the doorway. "You have been targeting me since I disagreed with you at the last board meeting," I said quietly. "This is retaliation, and you know it." The last board meeting had been a disaster. Brenda had wanted to increase HOA dues by 30% to fund a new decorative entrance monument that nobody wanted. I had spoken up against it, showing budget analysis that proved we could allocate existing funds more efficiently. Several other homeowners had agreed with me, and the vote had failed. Brenda had been furious, and I had seen her taking notes on who had spoken against her proposal. "This has nothing to do with that meeting," Brenda said, but her eyes told a different story. "This is about following proper procedures. The procedures were followed. You are making up new requirements to block my work. If you have a problem with my decision, you can appeal to the full board at next month's meeting." "Next month? The work needs to happen today." "Then you should have been more thorough with your documentation," she said, turning to walk away. I watched her go back down to the street where Marcus was still waiting. She said something to him, and he shook his head, starting to pack up his equipment. My mind raced through options. I could call the police, but this was technically a civil matter between homeowners and the HOA. I could contact a lawyer, but that would take time and money. I could just tell Marcus to go ahead anyway, but that would escalate things to a level I was not sure I wanted to deal with. Then, I remembered something. When I had bought the house, the property survey had shown that my lot backed up to a small access easement that ran between the properties on my street and the street behind us. It was originally designed for utility access, but it was technically public right-of-way. If Marcus could not access my property from the front because Brenda was blocking it, maybe he could access it from the back. I jogged down to Marcus's truck before he could drive away. "Wait, I have an idea. Can you access an attic from the back of a house?" "Sure, if there is a way to get to it." "Why? Follow me. Take your truck around to Palo Verde Drive, the street behind mine. There is an access easement that runs behind my property. If you can get to my backyard from there, Brenda cannot block you because she does not have jurisdiction over public easements." Marcus grinned. "I like the way you think. Let me check it out." I gave him the address of the easement entrance and watched him drive off. Brenda was still standing in the cul-de-sac, looking satisfied with herself. She had no idea what was about to happen. I walked back into my house, went through to the backyard, and started clearing a path to the back gate. My yard was fenced, but the gate opened directly onto the access easement. It was overgrown with desert vegetation because nobody used it regularly, but it was definitely wide enough for a person to walk through with equipment. 15 minutes later, I heard Marcus calling from the easement. I opened the back gate, and there he was with his equipment on a dolly. "This is perfect," he said. "I can run everything from here. Where is your attic access?" "Inside the house, but I also have exterior attic vents on the back side." "Would that work?" "Even better. We can do the whole job from the back without even going through your house if you want." We got started immediately. Marcus set up his equipment in my backyard, and I helped him position the hoses that would blow the insulation into my attic. The process was straightforward but time-consuming. He would need about 4 hours to complete everything properly. About an hour into the work, I heard my doorbell ring. I walked through the house and opened the front door to find Brenda standing there with another woman I recognized as Cynthia Morrison, the HOA vice president. "We heard noise coming from your property," Brenda said. "Is your contractor here?" "Yes, he is doing the work that was properly approved," I said. "I told you that work was not authorized to proceed," Brenda said, her face reddening. "You told me he could not access my property from the front. You said nothing about the back. Do not play games with me, Peter." "I am not playing games. You blocked legal access to my property from the street, so my contractor accessed it through the public easement in the back. You have no authority over public property." Cynthia looked uncomfortable. She was generally more reasonable than Brenda, and I could tell she was not entirely on board with this confrontation. "Brenda, maybe we should just let this go, if the approval was granted previously." "The approval was not valid," Brenda snapped, "and I want to see exactly what is being done." She tried to push past me into my house. I blocked the doorway. "You do not have permission to enter my property. I am the HOA president. I have the right to inspect properties for compliance. You have the right to inspect exterior features visible from common areas. You do not have the right to enter my house without permission, which I am not giving you." "Then I will call the police," Brenda said, pulling out her phone. "Go ahead. When they arrive, I will show them the approval documentation, the city permits, and explain how you are harassing me for retaliation purposes." Brenda dialed anyway. I was not worried. I knew my rights and I had documentation of everything. While we waited for the police, I went back to check on Marcus's progress. He had completed about 30% of the insulation installation and was making good time. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a young woman and an older man, approached my front door where Brenda was still waiting. I came out to meet them. "Good morning, officers. I am Peter Donovan, the homeowner. This is Brenda Patterson, the HOA president. She called you, I assume?" "Yes, sir," the older officer said. His name tag read Officer Rodriguez. "We received a call about unauthorized construction work." "The work is completely authorized," I said, showing him my phone with the approval emails and the city permits. "I hired an insulation contractor, got approval from both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee a month ago, and scheduled the work for today. Miss Patterson blocked my contractor from accessing my property this morning, claiming the approval was invalid. So my contractor accessed my property through the public easement in the back instead." Officer Rodriguez looked through the documentation carefully. "This all seems in order. Madam, why did you call us?" "He is violating HOA rules," Brenda said. "The approval he received is no longer valid because we restructured the committee." "You have documentation showing that his approval was formally revoked?" the younger officer asked. "Well, no, but the policy change means." "Madam, if he had approval and you did not formally revoke it through proper channels, then he has the right to proceed with his work. This is a civil matter between you and the homeowner. Unless there is an actual crime being committed or a legitimate emergency, we cannot intervene in HOA disputes." Brenda's face was now completely red. "He is being deliberately difficult. He is exercising his property rights," Officer Rodriguez said. "Sir, is there anything else we need to know about this situation?" "No, officer, thank you for coming out." The police left, and Brenda stood on my front lawn looking like she was about to explode. Cynthia touched her arm. "Brenda, we should go. This is not worth escalating further." But Brenda was not done. "This is not over, Peter. I will make sure the board knows about your deliberate defiance of my instructions. There will be consequences." "Your instructions were not legal," I said. "And if you continue harassing me, I will file a complaint with the state attorney general's office. Arizona has very specific laws about HOA conduct and abuse of power." That seemed to finally get through to her. Brenda turned and walked away, with Cynthia hurrying to keep up. I watched them go, then went back to supervise Marcus's work. By 2 in the afternoon, the installation was complete. Marcus showed me everything he had done, explained how much of a difference the new insulation would make, and gave me all the documentation I would need for warranty purposes and for my records. I paid him, added a generous tip for dealing with the morning drama, and thanked him for his patience. "Man, I have dealt with a lot of HOAs, but that lady takes the cake," Marcus said as he packed up. "You might want to watch your back. People like that do not forget." He was right, of course. Brenda Patterson was not going to let this go, but I was not going to back down either. I had followed every rule, done everything properly, and she had still tried to block me out of pure spite. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. The next morning, I went to my office at the accounting firm where I worked and spent my lunch break researching Arizona HOA laws. I discovered that Brenda had actually violated several statutes by attempting to block my approved work. HOAs in Arizona are required to follow their own governing documents, and they cannot retroactively invalidate approvals without due process. They also cannot use their position to retaliate against homeowners who disagree with them. I drafted a formal complaint and sent it to the entire HOA board, not just Brenda. I detailed everything that had happened, included screenshots of all my documentation, and cited the specific Arizona revised statutes that Brenda had violated. I also sent a copy to the management company that handled our HOA administration. The response came faster than I expected. That evening, I received a phone call from Robert Chen, another board member who I knew slightly from neighborhood events. "Peter, I got your email," he said. "I want you to know that not everyone on the board supported what Brenda did yesterday. Several of us were not even aware she was planning to block your contractor. I appreciate you calling, Robert. Look, this is getting out of hand. Brenda has been overstepping her authority for months now, and this incident with you is just the latest example. There are 4 other homeowners who have complained about her behavior in the past 3 months alone. I think it is time for the board to take action." "What kind of action?" "We can call for a vote of no confidence. If the majority of the board agrees, we can remove her as president and potentially from the board entirely. But I need to know if you are willing to provide your documentation and testimony about what happened." "Absolutely," I said. "Whatever you need." "Good. I am going to talk to the other board members tonight. We have an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow evening. Can you attend?" "I will be there." The next evening, I arrived at the community clubhouse where board meetings were held. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Word had apparently spread that something significant was happening, and about 30 homeowners had shown up, which was triple the normal attendance. Inside, the board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, looking composed but tense. Robert Chen sat to her right, along with Cynthia Morrison and 2 other board members I knew less well, Gary Wilson and Linda Shepard. Robert called the meeting to order and immediately moved to executive session to discuss personnel matters regarding board conduct. This was unusual, and I could see Brenda's jaw tighten. She knew what was coming. "Before we go into executive session," Brenda said, "I want to address the accusations that have been made against me. Peter Donovan has sent inflammatory emails accusing me of misconduct, but I was simply enforcing our community rules." "You blocked legally approved work," Robert said firmly. "We have all seen the documentation. The architectural committee approved his project 3 weeks ago. You did not have the authority to stop it." "The committee structure changed," Brenda argued. "The committee structure changed, but we did not vote to invalidate existing approvals," Linda Shepard said. She was an attorney who worked in real estate law, and her presence on the board had always been reassuring. "Brenda, what you did was not just wrong. It was potentially illegal under Arizona HOA statutes. You exposed the board and our entire association to liability." I was trying to ensure proper procedures, Brenda said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. You were retaliating against a homeowner who disagreed with you at a previous meeting, Cynthia said quietly. Several of us witnessed your behavior toward Peter after he spoke against the monument proposal. This has been building for a while. The meeting continued for another hour. During the executive session, which I was asked to briefly join to provide my account, I explained everything that had happened. I showed them the timeline of approvals, Brenda's intervention, and how I had used the alternate access route to complete the work legally. When we returned to open session, Robert made a motion for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Patterson as HOA president. The vote was 4-1, with only Brenda voting against it. She was immediately removed as president, and Robert was appointed interim president until the next regular election. But Brenda was not done. She stood up, her face furious. This is a coup. You are all conspiring against me because I actually try to maintain standards in this community. Fine, but I am not resigning from the board. I still have a seat, and I will make sure everyone knows what you have done here tonight. Actually, Linda Shepherd said, opening a folder, we have another matter to address. We received complaints from 5 different homeowners about your conduct over the past 6 months. These complaints detail harassment, selective enforcement of rules, and abuse of power. Under our bylaws, the board can remove a member for cause with a majority vote if that member has engaged in conduct detrimental to the association. You cannot do this, Brenda said, but she looked worried now. We can, and we have the documentation to support it, Linda said. She proceeded to read out summaries of the complaints. One homeowner had been fined repeatedly for leaving their trash, cans visible for more than 30 minutes after pickup, while other homeowners who were friends with Brenda had no such issues. Another homeowner had been denied approval for a simple paint color change that was within the approved palette, simply because they had questioned one of Brenda's decisions at a meeting. The list went on. The board voted 4-1 again, this time to remove Brenda from the board entirely. She would remain a homeowner in the community, but would have no official authority. Brenda grabbed her papers and her purse. You are all going to regret this. I will take legal action. I will sue the board. I will sue Peter Donovan. I will sue anyone who had anything to do with this. You are welcome to consult an attorney, Linda said calmly, but I would advise you to be very careful about making threats. Frivolous lawsuits can result in sanctions and attorney fees. Brenda stormed out of the meeting, and the room was silent for a moment. Then one of the homeowners in attendance started clapping, and soon the whole room joined in. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over, except it was not over. Not yet. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from a law office in Phoenix. Brenda had made good on her threat and was suing me personally for intentional interference with HOA governance and defamation. The lawsuit was clearly frivolous, filled with exaggerations and outright lies about what had happened. She claimed I had conspired with other board members to orchestrate her removal and had spread false information about her conduct. I immediately contacted Linda Shepherd for advice. She looked over the lawsuit and shook her head. This is complete nonsense. She does not have a case. But you will need to respond to it, which means getting your own attorney. How much is this going to cost me? Probably a few $1,000s at minimum, even though you will almost certainly win. The good news is that Arizona has strong anti-SLAPP laws. If a court determines her lawsuit is frivolous and intended to silence you, she could be required to pay your attorney fees. I hired an attorney named James Wu, who specialized in HOA disputes and First Amendment cases. He immediately filed a response to Brenda's lawsuit and a motion to dismiss under Arizona's anti-SLAPP statute. He also filed a counterclaim against Brenda for abuse of process and harassment. While the legal process moved forward, life in the neighborhood became increasingly awkward. Brenda started spreading rumors about me to anyone who would listen. She claimed I was trying to destroy the HOA, that I wanted the neighborhood to fall into chaos, that I was planning to do all sorts of unauthorized construction now that she was not there to stop me. Most of our neighbors ignored her, but a few seemed to believe her stories. I started getting dirty looks from some people when I checked my mail or walked my dog. One neighbor, an older man named Frank who lived 3 houses down, actually confronted me one evening. "You had no right to get Brenda removed from the board," he said angrily. "She was the only one keeping this neighborhood respectable. Frank, she blocked legally approved work on my property and violated state HOA laws," I explained. "I did not get her removed." The board voted her out because of multiple complaints from different homeowners. That is not what she says. She says you manipulated everyone because you want to turn your house into a rental property, and she was trying to stop you. I have never said anything about making my house a rental. That is completely false. But Frank did not want to hear it. He walked away, shaking his head. I realized that Brenda was conducting a campaign to turn neighbors against me, and some of it was working. Things escalated a week later. I came home from work one evening to find that someone had spray painted HOA Destroyer across my garage door in bright red paint. I immediately called the police and filed a report. The responding officer took photos and said they would increase patrols in the area, but without witnesses or security camera footage showing who did it, there was little they could do. I spent the next day cleaning the paint off my garage door and installing security cameras around my property. I had a pretty good idea who was behind the vandalism, but I could not prove it. The following week, I received a violation notice from the HOA. The new board, trying to distance themselves from Brenda's tactics, was still obligated to enforce the rules. The notice stated that my security cameras violated the architectural guidelines because they were visible from the street and had not been approved. I called Robert Chen, the interim president, to discuss it. "Robert, these cameras are necessary because someone vandalized my property. I am documenting everything that happens now. I understand, Peter, and I am sorry about the vandalism, but the rules about exterior modifications are clear. You need to submit an application for the cameras." "Fine. I will submit it today, but I am not taking them down in the meantime." "That is your choice, but you will continue to receive violation notices until you either get approval or remove them." I submitted the application, along with photos of the vandalism and the police report. I also included documentation showing that several other homes in the neighborhood had visible security cameras, which I had noticed during my evening walks. If the board was going to enforce this rule against me, they needed to enforce it consistently. To Robert's credit, he brought this to the board's attention. At the next meeting, they voted to update the architectural guidelines to explicitly allow security cameras without prior approval, as long as they met certain size and placement requirements. My cameras were approved, and I stopped receiving violation notices, but the harassment did not stop. Someone started leaving nasty notes on my windshield when my car was parked in my driveway. The notes accused me of being a liar, a troublemaker, and various other insults. I kept every note and added them to my documentation file. Then things took a more serious turn. One morning, I discovered that someone had slashed 2 of my tires overnight. This time, my security cameras caught something useful. A figure in dark clothing and a hoodie approaching my car around 2 in the morning. The person had been careful to avoid showing their face, but the cameras captured enough details for the police to work with. The police were more interested now. This was clear property damage, and the pattern of harassment was concerning. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Scottsdale Police Department was assigned to investigate. She reviewed all my documentation, including the HOA dispute, the previous vandalism, the notes, and now the tire slashing. "You believe Brenda Patterson is behind this?" Detective Martinez asked during our meeting at the police station. "I do not have direct evidence," I said. "But the harassment started immediately after she was removed from the board and sued me. She has been spreading false rumors about me in the neighborhood, and she made direct threats at the board meeting about making people regret their actions. Threats at a public meeting are one thing. Criminal vandalism is another. I will need to speak with Miss Patterson, but I want to review your camera footage more carefully first. Sometimes people make mistakes that reveal their identity even when they think they are being careful." Detective Martinez was thorough. She had the camera footage analyzed by the police department's forensic video unit. They enhanced the images and identified several details. The person was wearing a specific brand of running shoes that had distinctive reflective patterns. The person had a slight limp favoring their right leg, and the person appeared to be female based on body shape and movement patterns. Armed with this information, Detective Martinez obtained a warrant to interview Brenda Patterson and examine her property. When she showed up at Brenda's house, Brenda refused to cooperate without an attorney present, which was her right. But Detective Martinez was able to observe Brenda walking, and she noticed the same slight limp favoring the right leg. She also saw a pair of shoes in Brenda's garage that matched the distinctive pattern from the video. With probable cause established, Detective Martinez obtained a search warrant. The shoes were seized and sent for forensic analysis. They found microscopic paint particles on the shoes that matched the spray paint used on my garage door. They also found a receipt in Brenda's house for spray paint purchased at a hardware store the day before my garage was vandalized. Brenda was arrested and charged with criminal damage and harassment. The arrest made the local news, which is how most of the neighborhood found out what had really been happening. The story detailed the HOA dispute, Brenda's removal from the board, her frivolous lawsuit, and now the criminal charges. The reaction in the neighborhood was swift. Frank, the neighbor who had confronted me earlier, came to my house to apologize. "I am so sorry, Peter. I had no idea she was doing all this. She seemed so sincere when she talked about you." "It is okay, Frank. She was very convincing." "No, it is not okay. I should have asked for your side of the story before judging you. If there is anything I can do to help, please let me know." Other neighbors reached out as well, expressing support and apologizing for believing Brenda's lies. A few admitted they had also been on the receiving end of her harassment over the years, but had been too afraid to speak up. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney's office was not interested in being lenient. The evidence was overwhelming, and the pattern of harassment showed premeditation and escalation. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign of intimidation and property damage. Meanwhile, my attorney James Wu filed a motion for summary judgment in Brenda's civil lawsuit against me. He argued that the lawsuit was clearly frivolous and should be dismissed with prejudice under Arizona's anti-SLAPP law. The judge agreed, and not only dismissed the lawsuit, but ordered Brenda to pay my attorney fees, which had reached nearly $8,000. When Brenda's trial date came around, she changed her plea to guilty. Her attorney had apparently convinced her that fighting the charges was pointless given the evidence. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, with 60 days suspended, 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and restitution for the damage to my property, including the cost of the security cameras I had installed. She was also required to pay my attorney fees from the civil case as part of the judgment. The total financial impact to Brenda was over $15,000, not counting her own legal fees. The criminal conviction had another consequence I had not anticipated. Under Arizona HOA law, a person convicted of certain crimes involving property or fraud can be barred from serving on an HOA board. The conviction also violated our HOA's governing documents, which stated that board members must maintain good standing in the community. The new board voted unanimously to formally ban Brenda from ever serving on the board again, even though she had already been removed. More significantly, several neighbors came forward with their own stories of Brenda's harassment and abuse. One family revealed that Brenda had systematically targeted them with violation notices because their teenage son was openly gay, and she had made homophobic comments about not wanting that lifestyle visible in the neighborhood. This revelation was particularly damning and led to discussions about updating our HOA's non-discrimination policies. The investigation into Brenda's conduct revealed even more disturbing behavior. It turned out she had been misusing HOA funds for personal expenses, including billing the HOA for office supplies that were actually items for her personal use. The amounts were small, usually under $50 at a time, but over 2 years it added up to nearly $3,000. This discovery led to additional criminal charges for theft and fraud. The county attorney's office reopened her case to include these new charges. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that the financial irregularities were bookkeeping errors, but the pattern was too clear. She had submitted fake receipts and falsified expense reports. This was deliberate fraud, faced with additional charges and the likelihood of significant jail time if convicted at trial. Brenda finally accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, full restitution of all stolen funds and damages, and permanent probation conditions that included staying away from me and my property. The day of her sentencing, I attended the hearing. I was not required to be there, but I wanted to see this through to the end. Brenda looked diminished, sitting at the defense table in a plain blue dress. Gone was the confident, authoritative HOA president who had tried to block my contractor. In her place was a middle-aged woman facing real consequences for her actions. The judge was stern during sentencing. "Miss Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community. You were supposed to be serving your neighbors and upholding your association's governing documents fairly and impartially. Instead, you abused your power, engaged in harassment and retaliation, vandalized property, and stole from the very organization you were supposed to protect. Your actions have damaged trust within your community and caused real harm to multiple individuals. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your conduct." After the hearing, Detective Martinez spoke with me briefly. "I am glad we could get justice for you on this. Cases like this can be frustrating because HOA disputes often stay in the civil realm, and people like Miss Patterson think they can get away with anything. But when they cross the line into criminal behavior, we take it seriously. Thank you for your thorough investigation, Detective. I could not have done this without your work. Just doing my job. But let me give you some advice. Document everything in situations like this. Your detailed records made this case much easier to prosecute. A lot of victims do not think to keep that kind of documentation, and it makes our job much harder. With Brenda sentenced and out of my life, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The whole ordeal had lasted 4 months from the morning she blocked my insulation installer to her sentencing hearing. It had been stressful, expensive, and at times frightening, but I had stood up for my rights and prevailed. The HOA elected a new permanent board at the next regular election. Robert Chen remained as president, and several new members joined who were committed to transparent, fair governance. One of their first actions was to implement new oversight procedures for board member conduct and financial management. They also established a formal complaint process that gave homeowners a clear avenue to report concerns without fear of retaliation. The changes in our HOA went beyond just procedures. The culture shifted. Board meetings became more collaborative and less adversarial. Homeowners felt more comfortable participating without worrying about being targeted. Approval processes became more straightforward and consistent. It felt like a weight had been lifted from the entire community. My insulation, which had started this entire saga, was working beautifully. My energy bills dropped by almost 30% that summer, validating my decision to upgrade it despite the obstacles Brenda had tried to create. Every time I looked at my lower electric bill, I thought about how close I had come to letting her intimidation tactics work. Marcus, my insulation installer, called me a few months later. "Hey Peter, I wanted to thank you. After that situation with your HOA made the news, I got about a dozen calls from other homeowners in Scottsdale who were dealing with similar problems. Some of them said they were inspired by how you handled it. You stood up to a bully, and that resonated with people." "I just did what was right," I said. "Yeah, but a lot of people would have backed down." "Anyway, I wanted you to know that your situation actually helped other people find the courage to stand up for themselves too." That conversation stayed with me. I had not thought about the broader impact of what had happened. I was just trying to get insulation installed in my house and dealing with an unreasonable HOA president. But apparently, my experience had shown other people that they did not have to accept abuse of authority from their HOAs. A few months after Brenda's sentencing, I was contacted by a local television news station that was doing a series on HOA abuses in Arizona. They wanted to interview me about my experience. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to relive the whole situation, but James Wu encouraged me to do it. "The more people understand what happened to you, the more pressure there will be for HOA reform," he said. "Arizona has some of the worst HOA laws in the country. They give board members tremendous power with very little oversight. Your case is a perfect example of what can go wrong." I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a woman named Jessica Torres, was professional and well prepared. She had reviewed court documents, interviewed Detective Martinez and Robert Chen, and even attempted to interview Brenda in jail. Brenda declined. The segment aired on a Friday evening. It was a 10-minute piece that laid out everything that had happened, from the blocked contractor to Brenda's criminal conviction. Jessica Torres did a good job of explaining the broader issues while keeping the focus on my specific story. The response was overwhelming. The news station received hundreds of emails and calls from viewers sharing their own HOA horror stories. The station's website crashed temporarily because so many people were trying to access the video online. Jessica called me the next day. "Peter, your story has struck a chord. We are getting contacted by homeowners all over the Phoenix metro area with similar experiences. Would you be willing to participate in a follow-up segment about HOA reform?" What would that involve? We would bring together several homeowners who have had problems with their HOAs, along with some state legislators who have been trying to pass HOA reform bills. You would not have to do much. Just share your perspective on what changes you think would help prevent situations like yours. I agreed, and a month later I found myself in a panel discussion with 4 other homeowners and 2 state legislators. The stories the other homeowners shared were heartbreaking. One elderly couple had been fined tens of thousands of dollars for landscaping choices that their HOA president personally disliked, even though the choices complied with written guidelines. Another family had been forced to spend over $20,000 in legal fees fighting an HOA that tried to foreclose on their home over a disputed $50 fine. The legislators talked about bills they had introduced to increase transparency, limit HOA enforcement powers, and provide better protection for homeowners. One of them, a state senator named Patricia Ramos, was particularly passionate about the issue. HOAs serve an important purpose in maintaining property values and community standards, Senator Ramos said during the taping. But they have become little fiefdoms where board members can abuse their power with almost no accountability. We need to bring balance back to the system. Homeowners should not have to choose between spending thousands on lawyers or accepting illegal treatment from their HOA boards. The segment aired and generated even more response than the first one. Senator Ramos's office reported receiving over 2,000 contacts from constituents supporting HOA reform. Other legislators who had been sitting on the fence started expressing interest in the issue. By the end of that year, the Arizona legislature passed a comprehensive HOA reform bill. It included provisions requiring clearer documentation for all HOA enforcement actions, mandatory training for board members, restrictions on retroactive rule changes, protections against retaliation, and an expedited dispute resolution process through the state attorney general's office. The bill was not perfect, but it was a significant improvement, and Senator Ramos specifically cited my case during the floor debate as an example of why reform was needed. What happened to Peter Donovan could happen to any homeowner in Arizona, she said. An HOA president with a personal grudge was able to block legal work, commit crimes, and make his life miserable for months, all because our current laws give too much unchecked power to HOA boards. This bill will not eliminate all problems, but it will give homeowners better tools to protect themselves. I watched the legislative session online from my office, feeling a sense of accomplishment that I never expected to experience. What started as a simple home improvement project had turned into a catalyst for actual change in state law. Brenda served her 6-month sentence and was released on probation. I occasionally saw her around the neighborhood after her release, usually from a distance. She kept her head down and did not make eye contact. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was working as a cashier at a grocery store, a significant come down from her previous career in medical office administration. True to the conditions of her probation, she stayed away from me and my property. I never had any further problems with her. I like to think she learned something from the experience, but honestly, I did not care. She was no longer my problem. Life in Saguaro Heights returned to normal, or at least a new normal. The HOA board functioned efficiently and fairly under Robert Chen's leadership. Property values remained stable. The neighborhood felt like an actual community again, rather than a place where everyone walked on eggshells afraid of the HOA president. I eventually sold my house 3 years after all of this happened. I got a job opportunity in Austin, Texas, and decided it was time for a change. During the sale process, the buyer's agent asked about the HOA, and I was able to honestly say that it was well managed and fair. I mentioned the previous issues but explained how the board had been completely restructured and reformed. The new owner, a young couple with a baby, seemed relieved. "We were worried about the HOA," the husband told me during the final walkthrough. "We have heard so many horror stories about HOAs in Arizona." "I won't lie to you, there were problems in the past," I said, "but the current board is solid. Just make sure you document everything, read the governing documents carefully, and do not be afraid to stand up for your rights if necessary." "That is good advice," he said. "And hey, I saw that news story about what happened to you. That took guts." "It took documentation and a refusal to back down to a bully," I corrected. "But thank you." Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, bullies exist in all forms, including as HOA presidents in suburban neighborhoods. Second, documentation is your most powerful tool when dealing with any kind of dispute. Third, standing up for your rights often inspires others to do the same. And finally, sometimes a simple home improvement project can lead to unexpected consequences that change laws and help thousands of people. My new house in Austin does not have an HOA, which was very intentional. After everything I went through in Scottsdale, I wanted the freedom to paint my house any color I wanted, install any kind of landscaping I liked, and make improvements without asking permission from anyone except the city building department. But I do not regret my time in Saguaro Heights or even the nightmare with Brenda Patterson. That experience taught me to be more assertive, more thorough in my documentation, and more aware of my legal rights as a property owner. It also showed me that one person can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. The insulation that started everything is still working great in that house, keeping the new owners cool in the brutal Arizona summers. And somewhere in Scottsdale, there is a former HOA president who learned the hard way that power without accountability eventually leads to consequences. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just accepted Brenda's decision that morning when she blocked Marcus from accessing my property. What if I had sent him away and waited 6 weeks for another appointment? What if I had not thought of the alternate access route through the public easement? The answer is clear. Brenda would have gotten away with it. She would have continued abusing her power, harassing homeowners who disagreed with her, and stealing HOA funds. Other people would have suffered. The HOA reforms in Arizona probably would not have happened, at least not when they did. All of that changed because I refused to accept an unjust decision and found a creative solution to access my own property. The access easement was there all along, legally available for use, but I had never thought about it until Brenda forced me to find an alternative. In a way, her attempt to block me led directly to her downfall. There is something poetic about that. She tried so hard to stop me, to punish me for disagreeing with her, to assert her authority over my property. Instead, she pushed me to document everything, to seek legal advice, to stand firm on my rights. Every action she took to harm me created more evidence of her misconduct. She built the case against herself. I still keep in touch with some of my former neighbors in Saguaro Heights. Robert Chen sends me occasional updates about the HOA, which continues to function smoothly. The neighborhood has attracted new families who appreciate living in a place with clear rules that are enforced fairly. Property values have actually increased, disproving Brenda's claim that she was the only thing standing between the neighborhood and chaos. Marcus retired last year, but before he did, he sent me a nice note thanking me for standing up to Brenda. He said it had restored his faith that not all HOAs were nightmares to deal with. He included a photo of himself on his last day of work, standing next to his truck with a big smile. As for me, I am settled into my life in Austin. I work at a different accounting firm, have a nice house without an HOA, and have not had any disputes with neighbors about property improvements. It is peaceful, even boring compared to my last year in Scottsdale. But sometimes boring is good. Sometimes you appreciate the absence of drama. And sometimes you realize that the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight but refused to surrender. The whole saga started because I wanted to reduce my energy bills and needed to install insulation. That simple desire led to a confrontation with an abusive HOA president, criminal charges, legal reforms, and a news story that resonated with thousands of people. All because Brenda Patterson decided to block my contractor, and I decided to find an alternate access route. If there is a moral to this story, it is this: when someone with authority tries to stop you from doing something legal and proper, document everything, know your rights, find creative solutions, and do not be intimidated. And always remember that public easements exist for public use, including as alternate access routes when HOA presidents block your driveway.